up, Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever on this world you may happen to be at this moment. We are very happy to join you once again for an episode of Breaking History. How are you doing, Gordon?
Doing great, Matt. How are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, we got a lot. We were chatting a little bit about some of the points to touch upon today, and the world has given us definitely some, like usual, some interesting things that are worth adding some context. There's been a barrage of attacks on Russian military as well as civilian infrastructure over the past week. I think it's Operation Spider's Web or something. Discuss some of that. There's also, ironically, simultaneously in Istanbul, peace talks that have been underway to try to put an end to the Kiev conflict, or the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict. Whether that's even viable, I sincerely doubt, but we'll see. Some interesting points in the Middle East as well. The blockade of foreign ministers that Israel prevented from actually going to meet up with the Palestinian Authority. Definitely would be curious to get your thoughts on that. And then the big thing that we announced last week, I mentioned that June 4th is the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, the big Tiananmen Square massacre. And this is really a very, very big deal. I just did a Google search today, and I mean, there's a huge amount of effort right now to revive the story of what happened in 1989 on June 4th, which I contend, and I've prepared a little bit of a presentation with some slides. In my analysis, it was completely a Soros CIA color revolution. And most of what we've been told about it is make-believe garbage. And so that might freak out some people listening, might piss off some people. But I think overall, I'm bringing a lot of facts to the table, and I'd be curious to see what the audience thinks. So without further ado, I think we can jump right into it. But before we do any of that, maybe we should just listen to a word from today's sponsor. Block Trust IRA is today's primary sponsor. So let's have a listen. BadlandsCrypto.com has partnered with BlockTrust IRA to offer a secure path to convert your IRA or cash to cryptocurrency. The Patriots at BlockTrust IRA offer a real managed accounts with revolutionary AI Animus technology that navigates the market with computer-based precision, reducing the risk of the volatile cryptocurrency market. Animus AI Technologies was named the #1 crypto trading strategy in the world in 2023 by Bitcoin Magazine. Whether you have a retirement account like a 401k or IRA, or just cash savings sitting in a bank, meeting you little to no interest. With best-in-class military-grade technology, BlockTrust IRA's clients are 100% insured for up to $200 million. In fact, at badlandscrypto.com, they are so confident in their ability to help you succeed that for a limited time, they are offering up to $2,500 bonus in crypto when you open an account. Visit badlandscrypto.com and learn more about the best performing asset of the decade. That's badlandscrypto.com. All right. So yeah, what's your take on the current barrage? I mean, I know that Putin made some pretty stern, as well as Medvedev made some pretty stern responses to the barrage. There were military targets. As far as I could tell, there was nuclear missile delivery capable bombers that were attacked, that were destroyed by this swarm of drones. Civilian infrastructure was simultaneously targeted. Trains, a certain train in Russia derailed, killing a few people, the driver of the train. The Crimean bridge that connects Crimea with mainland Russia was attacked with a variety of different bombs and drones. So a lot went down. Some people say it's a complete embarrassment. Some people are asking, did Trump even know that this was happening? Others say this was done behind his back. That means that there's definitely something still very powerful and renegade that hasn't been reined in within the U.S. deep state controlling military intelligence. So what's your take so far on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you put it all in context and you lay it all out, the fact that you had multiple different attacks, different kind of attacks, all against not primarily or not only military targets. By the notably, you had that the major attack was the drones coming out of the truck, attacking the airfield, taking out the bombers. But then you also had the train derailment, like you said, the bridge in Crimea, the energy infrastructure that was damaged. Those are all civilian targets. All of this stuff happening concurrently, meaning it's all coordinated against the backdrop of these peace negotiations in Turkey, which is very like underhanded. And to your point, the like Trump and the United States may have not even been made aware of any of this stuff. And I think it's probably safe to assume they weren't. I saw like a clip that somebody posted of like a Steve Bannon rant where he said, if that's true, then there's nothing else to talk about. You get up and you walk away from the table and you just say, good luck. Good luck in the wars ahead, Zelensky. We'll see you on the other side. And we have this response from Putin. I think that's worth playing.
Но как же проводить в этих условиях подобные встречи? О чем говорить?
Okay, I just realized that there's no subtitles. But yeah, what he's saying in that clip is he's saying what else is there to talk about? There's no negotiation. Like I'm no longer interested in negotiating with these people. They're like why should I reward them? Like we went and met in Turkey. We went and met in Turkey last week, and while that was happening, this stuff happened. Why should I reward them by suspending military action against them? He's like, because that's what it would be. He's like, we're winning the war. Why would I stop if I'm winning? And which again is a huge contradiction to what all of the Western media outlets have been saying for the past 3 years is that Putin's been losing when in fact he's actually been winning.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Medvedev also came out with a strong statement saying, and usually he's like kind of trolling people and he's got a bit of a sardonic sense of humor, but this time it was just straight-faced, like cold statement. I think he said literally, look, we're not going to respond immediately, but everything that needs to be blown up will be blown up, and everybody that needs to be eliminated will be eliminated. Pretty straightforward. So we can definitely expect some form of response at some point. Russia's been pretty cool-headed up until now. Generally, that's their MO, is not to respond emotionally. I know that there's also military exercises that NATO is holding in the Baltic Sea. And simultaneously, in the same Baltic Sea, Russia has responded by hosting their own military exercises. That's also been something underway, which is worth keeping an eye out. Obviously, I don't think this is going to escalate, but there's definitely strong language being communicated from both sides based on that. What do you got there as an RT clip?
Yeah, so just kind of pulling up the latest headlines from RT. Foreign-made explosives were used in the railway terrorist attacks. This is from the Russian prosecutors. It says explosives used to blow up the 2 railway bridges in Russia over the weekend were foreign-made. The head of Russia's investigative committee, Alexander Bastrakin, has announced the attack, which claimed the lives of 7 civilians, was organized by Ukrainian intelligence, he added. Speaking at a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and government officials on Wednesday, Bastrakin said that the evidence, quote, the evidence collected by the investigators directly points to the fact that all 3 terrorist attacks in Bryansk and Kursk regions were beyond any doubt arranged by Ukrainian special services. According to Bastrakin, the bombs used in the attacks were composed of foreign-made plastic explosives equivalent to 15 kilograms of TNT and set off by a Ukrainian-made detonator. Yeah, probe is still underway, and then just more background to the setting and the what was happening politically with the negotiations in Turkey. And then you have this story: U.S. intel behind Ukrainian attack on Russian planes. Ex-French spy Kiev could not have remotely piloted drones deep inside Russian territory, inside Russia, without American satellite data, according to Guillaume Ansel, whoever that is. Ukraine would not have been able to remotely attack without direct intelligence and satellite support from the U.S. A former officer in the French military has claimed Ukrainian drones struck air bases across Russia on Monday in a coordinated attack known as Operation Spider's Web, targeting sites from Murmansk In the Arctic to Irkutsk in Siberia, Kiev has claimed that around 40 Russian military aircraft were damaged or destroyed, including Tu-95 and Tu-22 long-range bombers. Moscow has not confirmed the claims, reporting that most of Kiev's drones were shot down. The strikes were reportedly carried out using commercial trucks rigged with explosive-laden drones that had been smuggled inside Russia. Kiev's operation involved piloting FPV drones thousands of kilometers from the front lines. Guillaume Ansel, a writer and former French Army lieutenant colonel, told Le Monde on Wednesday, quote, "This is possible and conceivable only with the support of a powerful satellite communication system," he said. "Since the Ukrainians don't have this mastery, if they were able to act remotely, it's certainly thanks to the United States." Ansel suggested that Kiev, quote, "would not have been able to carry out the operation without information from American intelligence." Yeah. And I, frankly, I think he's probably right. I don't think that the Ukrainians have really demonstrated a very sophisticated military capability beyond that of, some of these militias that are operating in the Middle East. It seems like they would only be able to do something like this with a more powerful, well-equipped, and well-trained military or agency. I'm not going to say military because I don't think the U.S. military was involved in this, but agency backing them. And so if they have, satellites and communications array, this is where things get a little sticky, because we need to understand that I'm pretty sure Space Force, and this is a question I would ask General Quast if he were here and pose to him, is my understanding is that Space Force consolidated all of military communications, like all the military communications satellites fell under their purview back, I think it was 2022. It was definitely during the Biden administration that happened, because that was notable. And so that, and I'm pretty sure that the intelligence community piggybacks on all these military satellites. So if the Ukrainian military was using American satellites, even if it was claimed to be an American intelligence satellites, wouldn't that still be piggybacking off of military, like military satellites?
Yeah.
Now maybe the like U.S. intelligence can access the satellites and use their data without going through the military. That would be the question for people who probably maybe couldn't even answer it, because maybe that's classified. But that's kind of a hierarchy and a dynamic that I would question and wonder. Now, that none of that means that the White House would have had knowledge of this and that Trump would have had knowledge of this. I can't imagine that he would bless something like this, given all the rhetoric he's put out there about trying to make peace, and he, getting mad at Putin for firing missiles while he's negotiating peace, which, again, we played those clips last week, and I thought that was all kind of like WrestleMania style rhetoric. But I think that also lays a precedent for what we're seeing here, where while you have guys meeting in Turkey negotiating hostage or prisoner swaps, you have literal terrorist attacks against civilian infrastructure occurring inside of Russia, resulting in the death of Russian civilians. That is, a war crime, I would think, at least in the conventional wisdom. I think we've entered like a fifth or maybe even sixth generation of warfare, where there is no such thing as a isolated battlefield. All the battlefields are occurring, right here on the home front. So,
yeah, absolutely. No, it's important to just like take this exercise. I've always, because it's easy to sometimes watch world events as a spectator, instead of like putting yourself in the shoes of somebody in Russia. And imagine that we had the Mexicans being used as proxies, militarized by foreign agencies that were devoted to destroy us, and launching attacks onto American trains and energy infrastructure and, bridges that people needed to get from Rhode Island, to the mainland or something. Like you just imagine just how people would feel if that were actually happening. And here we're actually doing it. And you have a NATO alliance that was devoted entirely in 1949 to the purpose of destroying Russia. That was the purpose of this alliance. and it really lost its mandate when Russia willfully dissolved itself, or so the Soviet Union willfully dissolved itself and allowed the Warsaw Pact nations to become independent nations like Ukraine and Poland and others. But it didn't dissolve itself. It only expanded, and it increased its aggressivity. It immediately launched under Bill Clinton already aggressive illegal wars to help facilitate the balkanization of places like Czechoslovakia into smaller micronations that would be weaker. I think something like 20 to 30,000 civilians died in those NATO-led strikes. And then it just expanded after 9/11 into becoming more and more of an instrument for regime change. We saw it in Libya. We see these things, and this is what was run by Nazis. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, got to always hold in mind, as Colonel Tanner Watkins and Cynthia Chung and we've talked about, that NATO itself was staffed and managed by unreconstructed Nazis from the highest levels of the SS, from the earliest days of the 1950s onward. And now you got second, third generation operatives who are still doing their same thing, devoted to creating what Hitler failed to do, which was a fascist global international under a banker's dictatorship and an occult inner sanctum that would manage a new global feudal class. So it's like, that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're a part of. And then you got people like Macron, who I got this little statement here, this idiot Macron coming out saying belligerently, Macron to China, keep North Korea out of the Ukraine war or risk NATO coming to Asia. Because, there's been some North Korean troops that have been fighting, that have been sent and have been, fighting on the side of the Russians. Now, what does he think the influences that China has over an independent nation like North Korea? First of all. Second of all, who is he to threaten the expansion of NATO into Asia to begin with? You already have, it's already been proven that you have Western mercenaries galore, official state-sponsored support militarily, not just providing equipment, but also satellite information that's been going on from the get-go of this proxy war against Russia to the Ukrainians. And now, you have Macron going around saying, okay, we don't want other foreign nations intervening in this war, but you're already doing that. You already have French mercenaries galore and French, NATO connections all over the place in Ukraine, on the ground, in training centers. A lot of them have been bombed by the Russians. And you're saying now that we're going to expand NATO's military presence around into Asia. Well, you're already doing that. Like last week, we already showed that image here. That's already the U.S.-led military bases, which a lot of them are directly tied to NATO, that have just been built up, that are there surrounding China. That's already there, and North Korea and Russia on the Pacific front. We already have that. It's called the Quad. It's not fully solidified yet, but the whole idea of the Quad was premised, and it is still being advanced with primarily, South Korea and Japan are two key members with Australia. They wanted India. India's still on the fence. India's been playing sort of the hot cold game. Who knows? I don't think India is on board with this because they know that they're going to be a disposable proxy. And I believe that India generally knows that in their heart of hearts that their survival is dependent upon a strong Eurasian economy, which involves China and Russia and Iran as their allies, ultimately. Although there was some very, very dangerous maneuvers from something within India that resulted in some very destructive acts. But despite that, I don't think India is on board with the Quad. But Philippines certainly is, under Ferdinand Marcos Jr. They just did the biggest military exercises with the U.S. military that finished on May 9th. It was a 3-week-long exercise, 14,000 troops. Devoted, and also expanded U.S. military bases. There's 158,000 U.S. troops. It's expanding. And then, all premised on around this idea of this oncoming clash with China. Then you got the same thing in Taiwan. So Taiwan's also got, and we could talk about that a little bit later as the bridge towards the Tiananmen Square thing. But, Macron going out flipping his mouth off like that is also just so insane, considering how bad Europe is as far as their inability to just sustain their own people. And their desire, it seems, to destroy the lives of their own their own population. So to go and all of a sudden say you have the virtue to dictate to other nations what they should or shouldn't do when you yourself are participating in the murder of your own French citizens and European citizens, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the what's interesting, there's a few things that are interesting here. I've been saying for some time now that I do think that it doesn't really make sense if you kind of game this whole thing out. Well, number one, like, let's just talk, like, I want to make a note about the Operation Spider's Web, because to your point about the whole Nazi, the aftermath of World War II, the Die Spine, Die Spine, I don't know how you pronounce it, but the German term, the network that was allegedly used to get people to extract certain members of the Third Reich out of Germany at the end of World War II. Whether or not this is real or not, this is what the narrative says, and it stands for the spider. And then all of a sudden, and then and Putin has been sitting there branding this regime in Kiev as a Nazi regime, and then now they're like very, very sinister, well executed, successful network of conspiring terrorist attacks are all under Operation Spider's Web. There's some sort of poetry there that I can't quite put my finger on, but it just feels almost like they're thumbing their nose a little bit at Putin when they do that. I don't know why. But that's the way I interpret it. I don't see, to Putin's point in that video when he says, how do you negotiate with terrorists? How do you you can't negotiate with terrorists. These people aren't interested in anything reasonable. I agree with him. I don't see how, after everything that we have seen, after everything you've laid out, I would kind of argue that Putin's breaking point, it would seem, came at the Russo-Georgian War of 2008. I think that was probably his breaking point, because as he told Oliver Stone in 2015, he went to Bill Clinton before he became president, or I guess maybe when he first became president, when Putin first became president, and asked if Russia could join NATO as like a symbolic gesture to like basically dissolve NATO, right? To, kind of like an Ouroboros of NATO. And Clinton kind of laughed at him and said, no. You then get Putin offering to Bush to make the missile defense array. Shot that down, said nope. And apparently it was Bush Sr. who told him no, who godfather of the deep state, allegedly. The Yugoslavian situation, the situation in Yugoslavia that from 1998, 1999 that we've talked about on previous episodes. Putin kind of resolved that, it seems, by coming in and siding with NATO, siding with the West to a certain extent.
On that note, I said Czechoslovakia. I meant to say Yugoslavia earlier on. I don't know where my mind glitched out a little bit. Yeah.
You did say Czechoslovakia, but in my mind, I don't know why I translated to Yugoslavia in my head. I should have corrected you. But
okay, good.
So it feels like Putin resolved that by siding with the West and kind of be like, all right, like, we're gonna let cooler heads prevail. We're gonna negotiate this out. We're going to have this negotiated settlement. And then fast forward to 2008, and you get the Georgian Russo War, where NATO comes in and starts a war with Russia in Georgia as a proxy. And Georgia's not in NATO right now, right?
No.
The EU is they're not in NATO, but they're trying to join NATO. Is that right? Is it the NATO or the EU?
Yeah, both. But they really have been promised, since Dick Cheney originally promised that they would be able to join NATO when Saakashvili was still in there. And that was, I think, part of their hubris, was that they were given certain promises by Cheney and company that if they picked a fight with South Ossetia, where you have sort of a Russian sort of enclave, if they launched an attack, then they would get the full support of the West, and that would give a good excuse to say that Georgia should be absorbed into NATO, because look, you've got a big bad Russian villain. It's so much bigger. They need protection. And so, he went and did it. And this Harvard-trained, Soros-funded Saakashvili, I don't know how much he really understood of what his role was. I mean, the guy ended up in prison, and I think he died in Georgia, right, for corruption. Because afterwards he had to escape Georgia, and he got sanctuary in the United States, where he remained back for a couple, few more years. This is like an 8-day war, right? Russia came in, they cleaned up, it was over, it was done. And the promises to absorb Georgia were not met. But a case was built up saying that, look, again, it's still used today to argue by NATO-leaning Georgians in power today that, look, we are going to face another war again if we're not part of NATO as a collective defense thing. But then Saakashvili's next mission is indicative of what his real power was, because even a lot of smart people still think that he was somehow a beacon of democracy or something, even though he got power over a George Soros color revolution, the Rose Revolution in 2003. He went to, after spending a few years back in the United States, he then was invited by Poroshenko to go to Ukraine, where he was basically installed as the governor of Odessa, where he was working directly with hardline Nazis who murdered like 50 pro-Russian Ukrainians in the trade union building that was lit on fire. And he was the governor of that region at that time, who was protecting this entire Nazi-led Gestapo that was running amok in terrorist operations in Ukraine during the time of the civil war. Not a civil war. It really was a civil war. With these Kievan NATO Nazis launching attacks on civilians throughout 12 years leading up to 2022. So yeah, that was just my little rant on the side of the Georgia-Russia bizarre war in Saakashvili.
Yeah. And so, you know, that war happens in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Obama wins the election, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hillary Clinton becomes the Secretary of State. And we all saw how Hillary Clinton viewed Russia and the way she treated Russia, right? We all saw how that whole situation devolved, especially once we get to 2011 with Syria, which was all a spin out of alleged events from 2009, 2010, of denied access to egress or to easements for pipelines, et cetera. We've gone down that rabbit hole before. And so, yeah, from Putin's perspective, it's like, how could that not be your breaking point? Like, how can you even begin to negotiate with a side that is just so hell-bent on your destruction? And to that point, we actually got a disclosure from Lula, who, you know, whether or not this is true or not, Lula said yesterday that Joe Biden told him he wanted to see Russia destroyed during his time in office. And another interview with Le Monde. That's kind of strange that we're getting all these like deployments on the same day from Le Monde, but okay. And he says, Joe Biden, with whom I spoke at length, thought Russia needed to be destroyed. Lewis said, without elaborating when the conversation took place. In Europe, which for a long time embodied a middle way in the world, has now aligned itself with Russia, with Washington, and is spending billions on rearmament. That worries me. If all we talk about is war, there will never be peace. Now, this may or may not be true. I mean, you could also argue that maybe this is a regime tactic to, cause division between Trump and Putin and make sure Trump and Putin can't reconcile their differences and, push us deeper into war. But it is an interesting deployment. You also have this breaking news. This is like the latest breaking news from RT. Illegitimate Kiev regime turning into a terrorist organization. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here, is that if this is true, like that Kiev is a terrorist organization, and I sort of believe that it is when you consider that it's totally illegitimate, that hasn't held elections in many years. It all is spun out of a illegitimate regime change operation from the CIA in 2014. Then how do you negotiate a negotiated peace? Like, how do you negotiate peace and long-term settlement with a terrorist organization that is intent on destroying you? Because all you're doing is basically allowing them to bide their time and regroup and prepare again to start the conflict. So at a certain point, you kind of just have to go in and destroy them. And I know that's the argument that's kind of levied against Hamas. It's a slightly different situation because you do have very different dynamics in terms of the existing conditions of Gaza, the nature of the campaign that was conducted post October 7th very hastily without really taking the time to understand what was October 7th. Now we're starting to learn through these disclosures from the Shin Bet and from Qatar that it looks like Netanyahu himself was actually funding October 7th using Qatari money. And the Qataris, were told that this was money that was going to be used for humanitarian aid in Gaza. That's what it's looking more and more like. So, they go in and they carpet bomb Gaza and, of course, bolster the ranks of Hamas and make Hamas at like the peak of its popularity as it is now, not only in Gaza, but internationally. I think they probably have the most sympathy that they've ever seen. So I would say it's slightly different, but it's interesting that you have you're going to have another one of these contradictions where the same neocon Zionists who have been supporting Ukraine and have been saying that, we have to fight Russia to the very end, have also said we have to go in and destroy Hamas and we can't negotiate any peace with them. Well, Putin's now saying the same thing about Kiev. I tend to agree with him that, Kiev really is an illegitimate organization, and it does seem to be the government there, and it does seem to be a terrorist organization. It's demonstrated over this past week. So, yeah, maybe you do have to go in and finish them off. And if it's true that they did this whole operation without consulting Trump, then what else is there to talk about? If they're operating without consulting us, then we're not their partner. We're just their piggy bank. And I think we've all understood that. We have understood that for a long time. But, it's kind of silly that we even have to indulge these contradictory, like these contrasting views that think that there's something noble and altruistic about this entire conflict.
Yeah, I definitely would like somebody like General Quast or Flynn or somebody to speak a bit more. And maybe next time you chat with him, to ask him about what is the centralized control over information systems sharing within military infrastructure, and what are the loose ends, and if they're allowed to even say anything about that, because there's certainly a lot of evidence that there are a lot of loose ends that still haven't been tied up, and who's actually in charge, who's making decisions at the end of the day, is something that has to be really nipped in the bud fast, because we saw that in Trump's first term. We saw many cases, lots of points of evidence where Trump had to own disastrous decisions that were made from the military intelligence side that were trying to undermine and undo the various constructive policies towards dialogue and peace with North Korea, with China, with Russia. I even think that Soleimani's murder was also done as a renegade operation. I don't think that this was something that Trump actually sanctioned. I've seen a lot of evidence that's persuaded me that even that was part of an effort to increase the tensions between the U.S. and Russia, U.S., Russia, but also Iran. But so, yeah, I would not be surprised at all to find that something similar is being done even now. So we'll have to wait and see.
Well, two things on that. One, Unchained 01 makes a good comment here. High altitude balloons could also facilitate comms between drones and remote operators without satellites. So that's possible. Maybe the intelligence community could launch a high altitude balloon with the necessary communications equipment to do this operation. And then you don't even have to go through the military satellites. You also have the reality that if it is true that there was U.S. involvement, that there was U.S. facilitation, and Donald Trump did not have any knowledge of this, then heads need to roll. And I mean that quite literally. I mean that we need to drag people out for treason. And I'm speaking specifically about Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal being on the ground in Odessa while this is unfolding, as well as Mike Pompeo, by the way. You had Mike Pompeo in Odessa. You had Lindsey Graham over there. You had Richard Blumenthal. Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal are the two guys who were over in Libya with John McCain in 2011. They were in Libya meeting with the future leader of ISIS, the guy who would then go on to overthrow Gaddafi. John McCain goes on to go to Syria to meet with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And there's video, there's a CNN video crew with them filming the interaction, the conversation between him and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the future leader of ISIS, and the Republicans are still taken seriously. What? How is the entire RNC not been investigated for treason at this point? Maybe it has, but I just don't understand how these disclosures aren't being discussed in the public square, like on Fox News. And I mean, the answer to that is because Fox News is probably controlled by the CIA, but or at least gets its talking points from them. But I mean, the other aspect of this is, why are there so many former IDF officers in the Azov battalion? Why are there so many IDF officers in these militias, the Jewish 100? You know, the IDF clearly has a very, very strong relationship with a number of these militia and these paramilitary outfits that are operating in Ukraine against Russia. What's up with that? So none of this stuff is being discussed to the extent that it needs to be, and those conversations are far more important and far more telling than a lot of this other silly crap that the media has us spinning our wheels on.
And then there's also the entire al-Jawlani, right? The head of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, who's now been sanitized and rebranded as some sort of, with a new name as the official sort of clean-cut replacement to Assad, whose entire coup d'etat was assisted by 6 principal. I mean, there's radical jihadists from like 95 countries that took part and were all like assembled there, a lot of it assisted by Erdogan and his secret police apparatus in Turkey. But then there's like 6 primary groups, of which like their names are like the Turkestan Islamic Party, the Ashbal al-Turkestan group, the Ansar al-Turkestan, the Gurub al-Turkestan. Like these are 4 of the 6, all have Turkestan within their very name, and a disproportionately large number of these radical Islamist head choppers who are now being resanitized and given powerful positions in the Syrian government are one, Chinese Uyghurs. They're Chinese Uyghurs from the Xinjiang region who are radicalized in special madrasas and mosques, and like moved around the global chessboard by certain money bags tied to the Muslim Brotherhood on the one hand, and who have been like cutting their teeth learning the art of war, not the high art of war. I mean, just like cutting off heads in terror, in Iraq and in Syria, and now they're being re-empowered, reassembled, and a lot. And this is where maybe we should do a dive on this in a future episode, is the Ukrainian connection there too, because there's a lot of evidence of Ukraine Nazi groups that collaborate with these agencies, these Islamic, and early on in the special military operation, we already had evidence of several hundred Syrian fighters who were brought into Ukraine to fight alongside Nazis against Russia. Early on, Vanessa Beeley did a great deep dive on this back in 2022. And there's been military equipment. I mean, a lot of the, people wonder what happened to all of the money that we've been pouring into Ukraine, providing all sorts of military system support. A lot of it is being, buying up villas and manors and mansions and islands for the plutocrats around Zelensky, sure. But a lot of it is just disappearing into the black budget and into supporting regime change operations abroad. I wouldn't be surprised in Africa as well. I know that there are certain analysts who have been commenting about that.
Yep. Myself included.
Yep. And especially in Syria and beyond in the Muslim world, in preparation for this thing, and that are going on to be rearmed in preparation for a targeting of Iran, of China, again, which has been able to sort of subdue their terrorist problems since they spiked in like 2011, 2012. That's when the Islamic terrorist actions in China really spiked, and China's approach was very different from the West. But they've put that to bed for the past decade. There hasn't really been much since. But if there's this new infusion, especially through, there's all these porous pockets on the border that could involve infusing more fighters to carry out more asymmetrical warfare, that certainly does benefit certain agencies that would like to destroy Russia and China together. And they're using these proxies in Ukraine, in Africa, especially in Syria, to do so. So that's another point to hold in mind always.
Yeah, and the Syria thing is actually fascinating because I have been digging on this the past couple of days, and obviously I've been digging on it for a while, but the developments over the past week have gone really under the radar. Namely, the fact that you have Tom Barrack, who is Donald Trump's purportedly best friend, his oldest friend from the 1980s, the guy he trusts the most, the guy who stepped in and saved Jared Kushner in 2008 when Kushner's father's company almost went bankrupt while his father was in prison, put in prison by Chris Christie. Barrick came in and bought up half of that 666 building on Fifth Avenue, which was about to bankrupt the company, and bailed him out. Barrick's also the one who put Kushner in touch with MBS in December 2016 and basically started the path that led to the sword dance, and then I think helped facilitate the Abraham Accords with the UAE and Qatar.
Sorry, go on.
He made two very notable disclosures in the past week. One of them came yesterday with this article: Trump running out of patience on Ukraine, according to the U.S. envoy. Tom Barrack, a U.S. ambassador to Turkey and special envoy for Syria, made the remarks during an interview with Turkish broadcaster NTV on Monday in the wake of a second round of talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations, which lasted approximately 90 minutes. He was asked about Kiev's calls for high-level summit that would include Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky. Barrack indicated that any such meeting would need to be meaningful and yield substantive outcomes, while acknowledging that he could not speak for the U.S. president directly. He added that Trump, who has openly expressed frustration with both Zelensky and Putin, is not known for his patience. Barrack said Turkey could play a key role in facilitating a breakthrough, given its status as a mediator. But yeah, I mean, he said that it's at he's at the end of his rope. 6 days ago, he was meeting with Al-Jilani, again, like this cartoonish clown head-chopping jihadist who has been kind of whitewashed and represented as this legitimate world leader. And here's the headline. This is from Haaretz, the oldest newspaper in Israel. Israel could be left behind. That's the quote from Barrack. Trump's new Syrian envoy signals growing U.S. intimacy with Turkey. Tom Barrack's expanded role affirms that the U.S. views Turkey, not Israel, as the primary outsider player in Syria. Barrack, a friend of President Trump, was previously charged with being an unregistered foreign agent for the UAE. That's notable, by the way. The Biden administration charged him with 9 felonies in 2001. And he went to trial and he beat all 9 charges. But he was accused of being an unregistered foreign agent for the UAE. And almost was put in prison by the Biden administration. But he's basically saying here what I've been asserting here for months, that when the whole Assad overthrow happened in December, Trump came out and kind of threw his thumb on the scale for Turkey and said, congratulations to Erdogan, congratulations to Turkey. This is a major event for you, congratulations. And I think that probably had to irk Netanyahu in the diaspora a little bit, because we know that Smotrich and at least the zealots in the security cabinet view Damascus as a key crown jewel of the greater Israel project, and they've had their eyes on it for quite some time. So you have that development. So you have Tom Barrack in the span of 5 days doing a dual deployment of saying Trump is prepared to walk away from Israel, Trump is prepared to walk away from Ukraine at the same time. And that is very, very telling. And then lastly, he also put out over a week ago this post, which somehow I missed until yesterday. But I just want to read the first paragraph, and then he kind of extrapolates on that. But he says, a century ago, the West imposed maps, mandates, penciled borders, and foreign rule. Sykes-Picot divided Syria and the broader region for imperial gain, not peace. That mistake cost generations. We will not make it again. And then he goes on to recap what Trump said during his speech in Riyadh. Gone are the days when Western interventionists would fly to the Middle East to give lectures on how to live and how to govern your own affairs. Syria's tragedy was born in division. Its rebirth must come through dignity, unity, and investment in its people. That starts with truth, accountability, and working with the region, not around it. And then lastly, I would say, to round out that thought, you have Qatar announcing that it's going to invest billions of dollars in energy infrastructure in and pull that article up, in Syria. I think it's a coal plant, if I'm not mistaken, but let me just pull this up. It's right here. Qatar Energy awards $10 billion to Northfield South project contract at Technip and CCV. Qatar Energy has awarded an engineering, procurement, and construction project worth around $10 billion for North Field South project in Qatar to a wait, that's not right. That is, hold on. Syria is what we're looking for here, people.
But I did read that too. Yeah, Qatar is doing a lot of deals now with Syria.
Yeah,
well.
so and this all has to, here it is. Syria signs historic $7 billion energy deal with international consortium. This is from June 3rd, yesterday. Syria signed $7 billion deal with Qatar-led consortium to double the energy's electrical capacity by adding 5,000 megawatts to the grid. Armed gangs continue to loot power infrastructure faster than the government can repair it, creating major implementation challenges for the project. And that's where the riff is going to come, is that apparently there's another story I won't pull up that these underlings for al-Jilani are griping that he hasn't instituted Sharia law at a national level. It's being implemented allegedly at like local levels, but why haven't we implemented a nationwide Sharia law mandate? And so I wonder, the speculation is maybe that those people are going to get restless and try to overthrow him. I don't see how Jelani or any of his thugs are going to stay in power in Syria long term, especially if we're lifting sanctions, we're investing billions of dollars and building stuff there. I mean, is this stuff even real? Like, is this head chopper turned statesman story even real? Because I can't imagine that Qatar is going to turn around and invest $7 billion in building an energy facility in Syria if at the same time you have armed gangs roving around destroying stuff and looting power infrastructure facilities, so that doesn't really jive. There's something else happening there, whether the story is real and these guys are going to be swept out and you're going to have Assad make some sort of redemption tour. I don't know, but it's very, very notable that you have Qatar now investing billions of dollars to restore the energy capabilities. You also have Saudi Arabia paying off the Syria's debt to the IMF, meaning the IMF can't come in there and start requisitioning or repossessing, Syrian possessions.
Yeah, I guess my trepidation is always, we've had a little bit of discussion in the past on Turkey and what the hell is animating Turkey, and I know that there is something good within Turkey.
There's also a lot of bad in Turkey.
Yeah, you got their own legacy of Operation Gladio, the Grey Wolves and all that stuff, that and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is hugely influential, especially throughout the Cold War and into Erdogan's rise. There's some interesting clashes with Fethullah Gulen, his nemesis, who is definitely a Fabian occultist type who was protected by the USA after he was expelled from Turkey. And there's a lot of interesting things that have showcased Erdogan sort of being pulled in two different worlds. But there is this pan-Turkic Ottoman revivalism, which is an unhealthy sickness to it that isn't all that different from the underlying logic of the greater Israel. It's just greater Turkey, kind of like greater Ukraine too, greater Poland, greater Lithuania. You got like all of these, they're the offgrowths, the current generation's outcome of what was put into motion, especially under such Freemasonic occultists like Giuseppe Mazzini and Lord Palmerston back in the 1840s and 50s, that seeded these young Europe movements all over the world. And Turkey was no exception. America was no exception. It was called the KKK later on. B'nai B'rith grew out directly of this thing. So, you got this shit, sorry for the language, that is also unresolved, that causes me always a little bit of like, I don't allow myself ever to get too happy when I look at these scenarios.
You don't want to get swept up in the idealism. You don't want to get swept away in the idealism and just thinking everything is peachy and great.
Exactly.
And what you're getting at is empire building. What we're talking about is empire building, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking about aggressive expansionism and conquest, warmongering.
Yeah.
all the elements of the neoconservative movement, all the elements of the neoliberal movement for that matter.
Yes.
But what's interesting is this other development.
The other thing too that also caused me a little bit of trepidation too is I didn't know that Tom Barrack was involved with the bailing out of Jared Kushner
the
through the sale of
building.
Of the 666 building, because that was overseen by Mark Carney and Brookfield Asset Management through the Bronfman operation, which is tied to Epstein, which and the B'nai B'rith.
Interesting.
So Brookfield, like we talked about a few weeks back, right, is tied to the entire organized crime, again, Freemasonic apparatus that's really been controlling Canada for a very long time as proxies for the British Empire. So Brookfield was the thing that Tom, I just Googled it while you were speaking. I didn't even realize that Tom was interfacing with when they oversaw the sale and then bought it from themselves with Tom's funds involved with that. So that again caused me some trepidation, my cautious side was just like started screaming loudly where I like red alarm.
The 666 building is like the thing that everybody points to when they want to make the point that Jared Kushner is not to be trusted. And I understand why that would be the case, because the address of the building is 666. Where I fall on that, and I don't know the answer. How could I know the answer? It's just trying to piece all these breadcrumbs together and try to parse what makes the most logical sense just from a simple human incentive structure and human nature. What doesn't make sense to me is why Charles Kushner would go to prison. That is a story that I cannot wrap my head around, because the official story is that Charles Kushner was involved in some sort of campaign finance situation. He was prosecuted by Chris Christie, who is one of the most prolific Zionists in American politics, I would say. He is just one of those people who has always been hyperventilating about Israel and protecting Israel and doing whatever Israel wants we're going to do. So he's obviously deeply controlled by the diaspora, deeply controlled by the Zionists. And Charles Kushner is a lifelong friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, to the extent that Bibi Netanyahu, when he would come to New York back in the 80s and 90s, would sleep in Jared Kushner's bed, would insist on doing that rather than going and staying in a hotel, which to me just doesn't make any sense. I think that's like a dominance thing. I don't know what it is with that, but I can't get away from that, because
was Jared in that bed?
Yeah, that's the question. I would say it sounds like he was kicked out. It sounds like he would come kick Jared out of the bedroom and then be like, "I'm sleeping in your son's bed." That's just a weird dynamic to me. Like, why would a grown man even want to do that? Like while you're like deputy foreign minister of Israel, none of it makes any sense. But why couldn't Charles Kushner, who allowed this guy to sleep in his son's bed, pick up the phone, call Netanyahu, and say, "Hey, get me out of this situation. Call your boy Chris Christie, give me a sweetheart deal. I'll plead guilty, slap me on the wrist, pay a fine. I'll go do a few mea culpas and we'll move on." Why then was there some sort of situation where he was then accused of trying to honeypot his brother-in-law with a prostitute, because his brother-in-law was going to testify against him, which doubled the charges. Chris Christie then brought new charges about witness tampering. And then Chris Christie comes out and says that Charles Kushner is one of the worst criminals that he's ever prosecuted and just a horrible human being. And it's none of that makes any sense to me. If this guy is on the board of directors of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, he's lifelong friends with Netanyahu. He obviously is deeply connected in the diaspora. Why would he not get a bailout from any of them for a campaign finance like nonsense? What? That is not something they prosecute people for if you were on the up and up with the regime. So that's where with the whole thing with Kushner the whole thing of Kushner being a black hat doesn't pan out for me, because if that's the case, then why did they put his father in prison for 2 years? Doesn't make any sense. I can't wrap my head around that. So I can't move past that. And now you have Charles Kushner being given arguably the cushiest job in the world, which is the American ambassador to France, where he gets to go live in France now and drink wine. And I mean, given France is in a pretty dire straits right now with the whole NATO Russia stuff, but I would argue that Germany and England is actually taking a more prominent role. So, I think that there's something more to that whole 666 situation that needs to be parsed out. I wonder if all of that was done to bring down the Kushner family for whatever reason, like he pissed off the wrong person. But anyway, I digress.
Let's do this. Oh yeah. Okay. Go on.
Last point, and then we'll reset and we'll get into Tiananmen Square. This is a really interesting development though, because while you have all this happening against the backdrop in Israel, you have a lot of different political grenades going off that we've talked about in the past. But the most recent one is this. So that they've restarted this campaign into Gaza. They want to start the war back up. They obviously want to expand it. They obviously want to go to war with Iran. There's talk about invading Egypt and Sinai. They've been talking about that since like January. They need soldiers. So last year, the Supreme Court sided with Netanyahu and said, yes, you can force these Haredi, which is the Orthodox and Hasidic Jews, to serve conscription in the IDF, which they've always been given the exemption under the logic that their religious studies serves as their service to Israel, to the state of Israel. And so now they need the soldiers. So all the generals in the IDF are saying, yeah, go get those kids and bring them in here because we need warm bodies for the front line. And now the Haredi leaders, these rabbi, many of whom are the very people that Netanyahu went and made this unholy alliance with in December 2022 in order to return to power as the prime minister, to bring these zealots in with him. They're all saying, we are now going to dissolve your government if you do this. Like now it's a total match of a game of chicken where they're saying we are backing a dissolution draft to totally collapse your government. You will be prosecuted for those 3 felonies from 2019 if you do this. But at the same time, the IDF chain of command is saying we need soldiers. So you either end the war or you give us these Haredi kids, these Orthodox kids. But at the same time, it's the Orthodox community that wants the war. So it's like there's all of these competing dynamics that I think are acting like a boa constrictor, and they're like strangling the life out of this super corrupt, whatever this thing is, this diaspora Zionist cabal in Tel Aviv. And it is happening in a very, very inopportune moment for Bibi Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very interesting. So let's maybe shift gears. I'll run the second ad for today. I'm gonna have to just run quickly. Nature is calling, and I'm gonna come back hopefully before the ad is finished, but who knows? And we could have a look at something that is being celebrated as far as a famous event known as the Tiananmen Square massacre, which I've got a new look at that I think people will be surprised by. So without further ado, let's just play, if I can find it, the second ad. Rise Attire. Here we are. Rise Attire.
By now, you've probably seen the new collab between Rise and Badlands Media, but I'll tell you what you haven't seen yet. The end of Clown World as we know it. But have no fear. Introducing the latest addition to the Badlands INTL lineup, the sequel to the best-selling Psy War series. We've been conditioned by these clowns to accept their circus. But it's time to unwind that and strike them out the history books. The future belongs to the real, and we've got it in droves. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/rise for the full line of premium and direct-to-garment streetwear. Made to order right here in the good old US of A, the heart of the resistance. The fall of Clown World is upon us, patriots. Let's make it official.
All right. Okay. So, just need a little screen share here. So just to really make it real, this is just a quick Google search from today, where I just typed in Tiananmen Square massacre. And of course they're like hyping this thing up for political reasons. And you could just see some of the recent things from the London Guardian, Reuters, Human Rights Watch, which is George Soros funded, Fox News, the Taipei Times, again, a CIA funded operation, the Tribune, China. So we will never forget Tiananmen crackdown, Taiwan and the USA on the 36th anniversary. China, Rubio exchanged jabs on the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. World won't forget Tiananmen Square, US and Taiwan say. Same thing, Guardian. But it just goes on and on. I mean, it's pretty in our face, and it's something which has taken on kind of a myth unto itself, a life on its own. Sorry, I just lost my connection there. I hope it doesn't happen again. So the thing also that Rubio was doing, which is a bit sad and unfortunate, is that he's also overseen the new acceleration of U.S. troops. A lot of it, there's already been Green Berets in Taiwan shaping and training the Taiwan. Not Taiwan. Yeah, Taiwan, the Taipei military. And they just announced an additional 500 troops in Taiwan as another major challenge to China. Taiwan has this strange military training program with the U.S., where Taiwan has been sending hundreds of troops to be trained in U.S. military bases and then sent back. And then the U.S. has been sending U.S. troops to Taiwan as well. Now, keep in mind here, so the one thing to just hold in mind is that every country in the world, except for 13, of which the Vatican is one of them, acknowledges that Taiwan is a province of China. They recognize the One China policy that was signed as the Beijing Agreement in 1979 or 78 that recognizes a One China policy, that Beijing is the capital of One China, and that Taiwan has a high degree of autonomy as a province, but it is still a province of the country that it is a part of. It's not its own country. It can't have official embassies in every country except for those 13 that do recognize it as its own thing, including the U.S. State Department, which still has a recognition that Taiwan is a province of China. That's even today, including that's the U.S., that's Canada, that's every European country except for the Vatican. So, what's really, I think maybe Lithuania is another one that doesn't, but it's a short list. Anyway, so you've all of this. They're invoking a lot of the imagery of evil China, the supervillain that hurts Uyghurs, poor Muslim civilians in Xinjiang who have been just brutalized by big bad China, ignoring the fact that the Uyghur population has increased massively over the last 50 years, and their life expectancy has doubled from 1981 to the present, which is just incredible. It's already nearly exceeding U.S. average life expectancy. So that's the weirdest kind of genocide I've ever seen in my life. There's like 26,000 mosques in Xinjiang. It's got the highest per capita ratio of mosques to population in any non-official Muslim country in the world, much more so than the USA. So you have all of this stuff. There's also dozens of churches, because there's also minority Christians living in Xinjiang too. They have churches there that they can go to. There's Buddhist temples as well. So it's not like there's this stifling, Borg-like anti-spiritual, anti-religious monstrosity that's just destroying people's conscience and their lives and their humanity. It's not really happening, but we're being told it is. And it's amplifying into our felt thoughts that we're associating with all of these other geopolitical hotspots that we're giving increasingly our emotional support to, even if the facts don't support that. So I got a few slides. Actually, before I do that, here, let me just do show a little video. I think everyone knows of the Tank Man, right? Everyone's seen the Tank Man. Let me just do it. This is my share screen. Never forget. So we've all seen this very iconic image, right, of the courageous Beijing fellow near, not in, but nearby Tiananmen that faced down these PLA tanks. And for many years, I was of the belief that he died, that he was run over, and that he gave his life for liberty. That was the thought that was embedded in my psyche, along with other thoughts like if I were to be, if you were to have asked me 5-6 years ago how many people I thought died, how many students died, were murdered by the Chinese government, I would have said 10 to 20,000. I see it floating around. The number vacillates between 10,000 and 30,000 amongst most surveys of a Western audience these days. Huge numbers. I don't even think that there are that many enrolled in school, but whatever. That's the consensus numbers in Western audiences. Now, not only did this guy, let's see what actually happened. So he stares down this tank. So there's tanks. There's definitely violence happening. About half a mile away from Tiananmen Square, there are riots that are happening. Really crazy, but I'm going to show some images of what those riots were that were not the students. This guy is, during this time, for whatever reason, he takes a stand. He wants the tank to go away. And he just keeps getting in front of it. Okay, all right, all's good. And this is the iconic picture that won the Pulitzer Prizes. Staring down the tank. All right. Now he hops on the tank. Hops on the tank. I'm just going to fast forward a little bit. Gets in there, starts yelling at the tank driver, stands on the tank with his grocery bag or whatever that is, hops off the tank. Tanks are still probably cursing at him, saying, fuck off. Tank tries to get around him again. No, gets in front of the tank. Okay, let's skip ahead a little bit more. This guy's crowd is yelling at him, saying, get the fuck away. Sorry for the language, but the crowd is like, what are you doing? This guy on a bicycle comes up, gives him some good advice, saying you should go home now. And a couple of other people run up behind him and proceed to grab him and drag him off to make sure that he doesn't get run over by a tank and everybody is safe. Now, this bicyclist waves over,
waves at the tank and keeps riding his bike. This is amazing. I've never seen this before.
Yeah. And basically, he is pulled away. That's it. And then they replay this a few times. So yeah, it's fun.
And then nothing happens after that. Like the tanks just keep driving. Okay.
Yeah. So all right. That's just one little, don't believe your eyes. Like there's felt thoughts that are more than logic that we know in magic shows. It's all about perception management. You can create something out of context to get people to feel a certain way, think that the rabbit is in the hat. The rabbit was already removed from the hat 5 steps ago and you didn't even notice. So it's all about perception.
Yeah. I think there's a movie where they say it's always about when the trick happened. It's like, it's not about where it happened. It's about when it happened. And it's like the timing of it. So yeah, it's all about perception, to your point.
Totally, yeah. And we are living in a world of magicians' magic tricks, especially with the power of media, visual multimedia that's been around now for some decades. It makes it that much easier to play with magic tricks. So here, I got a few slides. I'm not going to go through all of them because I don't have time. We do have to end at 2:00. But I'll go through as many as I can. So yeah, here's the tank guy. Oops. Oh no. Oh no. I uploaded my PowerPoint, but apparently the PowerPoint didn't upload. It just uploaded the first 2 slides. Oh no, that's terrible.
It's all right. Just go ahead and pull it back up. We
I'm going to do that right now.
While we're waiting, everyone, please hit the thumbs up if you're enjoying the conversation. And we actually have how much time you need?
Give me 3 minutes.
3 minutes? Okay. We actually have a Badlands boost from 2 weeks ago that we did not read. From Thomas Times, excuse me, $5. Just last week, while researching exiled leaders in recent history, I discovered Iran has one. Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Please do a dive on him in connections to modern events and how we may see him return to his rightful seat. Love the show. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the Shah, right? Is he talking about is the Crown Prince? That's not the Shah, is it? Let me see. The Crown Prince.
That's the Shah's son.
The Shah's son. Yeah, exactly. So it's it's the Shah, that's what I thought. It's the Shah's son.
He's a Zionist shill though. That guy's sketchy as hell.
Yeah, he's living in exile, of course, but it's important to understand that his father was installed by the CIA in 1953 in a coup, which was then confessed to the Iranian people in 1978, 1979, 25 years after the coup, just in time for them to understand, hey, your government is actually totally illegitimate and was created by the CIA because the guy before him tried to nationalize the oil and take it away from the West. And you should go overthrow your government, by the way. And that was when the 1979 revolution happened. So not exactly the rightful heir. I wouldn't say he's the rightful ruler of Iran, but yeah.
I mean, for monarchists who who are susceptible to hereditary rule sure. I guess one could say that. But anyway, here we go. So here's the slideshow. So I was able to pull it up miraculously. So let me just do a little full page thing and just run through this quickly. So as I said, this is a color revolution, and we've all known, the audience of this show knows very well some examples of how color revolutions work. You get a bunch of people who are disenfranchised or who have problems economically, who are protesting some issues with the government, and they just want reforms usually. And then you have the CIA and other foreign agencies, often funded by George Soros, infuse violent provocateurs to throw Molotov cocktails, to often use snipers to kill both cops as well as protesters, to just inflame chaos in order to, under the veil of democracy movements, overthrow governments that you don't like. This is the Hong Kong protest of 2019. People were lit on fire. There's all sorts of imagery of these Antifa-like Hong Kong protesters trained by CIA. And even there were some Kievan Nazis who were on the ground in Hong Kong who were training groups of these Antifa types to just light Hong Kong on fire, light people on fire. When I was there in 2019, several metro lines, subways were lit on fire. Many of the protesters had US and British flags saying, President Trump, please come in, militarily liberate Hong Kong from big bad China. You had flags calling for the return of Hong Kong to glorious Britain, great freedom-loving Britain. These are some just pictures from the streets of Hong Kong during that time. Georgia, again, 2020, 2003, 2024, subjected to massive National Endowment for Democracy funded operations. Taiwan, 2014, you had the Sunflower Movement, again, a Soros NED funded operation with young people used to go and take over, storm the parliament of Taiwan and take it over. That's them there on the left. They were a little less violent. It's not as violent of a culture as some of the other places we've seen. And so it was really hard to radicalize them and get them to drop blood, but they definitely put their bodies into it. Again, Project Democracy. This is the National Endowment for Democracy. It's tied to the Open Society Foundations. They work together since the early 80s to overthrow governments. It's a project from the special group of Samuel P. Huntington, who ran the task force on the governability of democracies in 1975 for the Trilateral Commission in Kyoto, Japan, where Huntington wrote, one might consider means of securing support and resources from foundations, business, corporations, labor unions, political parties, civic associations, and where possible and appropriate governmental agencies for the creation of an institute for the strengthening of democratic institutions. So he's basically calling for a rebranding of how the CIA, formerly it was the CIA and it was formerly the Green Berets that were the open sponsors of foreign interventions in Vietnam and in Latin America and beyond. And they basically said, well, this is looking really bad. You've got MK Ultra coming to light, other things that are proving the abuses of the intelligence agencies of the United States. And so we need some new way to rebrand it under democracy institutions, maybe private, funded by labor organizations. And this is where things like the American Freedom Foundation came into play. The National Endowment for Democracy Act was passed in 1983 with $31 million of funding from the AFL-CIO Free Trade Union, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the International Republican Institute, and the International Democracy Institute, and Freedom House, which is tied to Soros as well. And they began just getting to work. And David Ignatius said that a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA, and he said that in 1991. It interfaced and was given the mandate or its operational procedures from an agency that was at the Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. This is where Gene Sharp, who's the weird, creepy eyes and nose on the left, was running the Albert Einstein Institute. He wrote handbooks on how to start a revolution. And this has been used to this very day at training cadres of democracy revolutionary activists from Ukraine and Georgia to Iran in different, workshops in their own countries. And often they're shipped out, they're flown out with little scholarships to the USA or to Sweden, and then flown back with special knowledge on how to coordinate using Twitter, social media, and other things, mass uprisings. This was the outgrowth of the Office of the Chief of Psychological Warfare and Special Operations Office from the CIA. Henry Kissinger taught at this thing as well. It was founded by Kissinger and McGeorge Bundy, two Bilderberg steering committee members. This is where Klaus Schwab went to university, where Kissinger trained him and then installed him as a front man for the World Economic Forum in 1971. Zbigniew Brzezinski also was a founder. Samuel P. Huntington, Dean Rusk, Rhodes Scholar. Let's just skip that. So Kissinger,
are you going through the slides? It's on the first slide on the screen. I'm just letting you know.
It's on the first slide.
Yeah. So it was on like the first slide of.
No. Oh no. Impossible.
At first it looked like it was moving, but then for some reason it went back to that first slide. So I don't know.
Try this one more time. If this doesn't work, I'm just gonna because there's so many good pictures. I really wanted to share some great pictures. All right, let's do this again.
Just share your entire screen. Yeah, there you go. Share your entire screen.
We're gonna do that. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not gonna do full screen here, but did you guys see this slide or this slide?
I don't think so. Yeah, flip through those real quick if you just want to recap.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's the Hong Kong protests 2019 I was mentioning with the U.S. flags. That's again Hong Kong protests calling with British flags everywhere, calling to return to Britain. Georgia protests, the Taiwan Sunflower Movement 2014. Then I had a picture there of Gene Sharp with the Center for International Affairs at Harvard. Can you see these images now? Are they showing up?
Yeah,
okay.
They're showing up now.
Okay, good. And then I was going to skip some stuff. So going through the, can you see Kissinger right there?
I can.
Okay. So Kissinger is making a big point in 1974 that the new U.S. foreign policy has to be vectored around encouraging negative population and zero technological growth to poor countries that had formerly aspired to be sovereign, modern, industrial societies following the Japanese model. And he comes out with his NSSM 200 report asking, is the U.S. prepared to accept food rationing to help people who cannot and won't control their population growth? The U.S. will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. That fact gives the U.S. enhanced interest in political, economic, and social stability of the supplying countries, that is, the resource countries. Wherever a lessening of population pressures through reduced birth rates can increase the prospects for such stability, population policy becomes relevant to resource supplies and to economic interests of the United States. Although population pressure is obviously not the only factor involved, these types of frustrations are much less likely under conditions of slow or zero population growth. And he basically calls for promoting global depopulation and population control in countries that have resources that the U.S. needs to control for their own strategic stability. These are some of the programs that Kissinger is following, the idea of the limits to growth that came out of the Club of Rome, this model that tried to justify the neo-Malthusian idea that populations will always exceed the means of supporting those populations to justify scientifically why populations should be reduced to carrying capacity levels using advanced computer modeling. So again, this is Club of Rome that generated this. This was brought in, financed by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands into the World Economic Forum's third session in 1973, and it became the standard operating procedure on how to think about population growth. No creativity, no discoveries, none of that. It's just human beings are pollution machines who have to be curbed. Some of these figures who play a big role in the Tiananmen Square story, because you got to know this backstory to appreciate what Tiananmen Square was about, what the color revolution was about, involved Milton Friedman, who had just been given a Nobel Prize to validate his worldview on how to think about the science of economics. We have there Alvin Toffler, the founder of and the leading transhumanist and futurist who wrote The Third Wave. Kissinger himself played a key role in opening up China. You know, in his NSSM 200, he had outlined 15 countries that we need to promote depopulation around. China was not among the list, but I think it was actually the highest in his mind of priorities, because at the same time he was brokering the opening up policy of China in order to bring about a new model whereby China was going to be the poverty-stricken, cheap, like sweatshop producing the stuff that the U.S. would no longer produce, because the U.S. was supposed to externalize their manufacturing, so that we would have the world divided by haves and have-nots, and the U.S. would stay too useless and mentally corrupted by consumerism to produce for themselves. They would forget how production works, and then the Chinese and the Indonesians would stay too poor to purchase what they produced, and would instead just produce cheap stuff that would be sent to Western consumer markets. And that was supposed to be the forever crystallized model. George Soros, everybody knows. That's a key figure here. Zhao Ziyang, who was first premier of the Chinese Communist Party, and then he rose to become a Secretary General in 1987 to 89. That's him with Reagan, who also had just passed the National Endowment for Democracy Act. And he was being hailed as the Gorbachev of China. The guy, just as Gorbachev was prepared to privatize Russia and undo the Soviet system and open up for free market capitalism under the Milton Friedman model, so too was Zhao Ziyang positioned to do the exact same thing in China, which he did. He made things very easy for Soros and company to begin to basically train a whole generation of young Chinese people, students in Harvard and Oxford and Yale, and then would be sent back to be the new technocrats managing the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And he actually literally calls it that. Just like Klaus Schwab gave it that more popularized name back in 1983, it was already being discussed, because he was part of the Club of Rome apparatus, where he says, whether we call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution or we call it the Third Wave, which is the Alvin Toffler term, these writers all believe that Western countries in the 1950s and 60s reached a high degree of industrialization and are now moving to an information society. At the end of this century and the beginning of the next century, or within a few decades, there will be a new kind of situation in which breakthroughs in new technology that are happening now or will happen soon will be used for production and for society. For us and for the future of the four modernizations, this is both an opportunity and a challenge. So his idea, the fight there is, what would the industrial policy of China be? Would it be the idea of developing the Belt and Road Initiative to develop like a modern full spectrum society? Or would it be based upon the Fourth Industrial Revolution idea of an information society where most people become useless eaters? I'm going to skip Toffler's comment about that because we don't have enough time. But basically, Toffler is getting at the idea to get over the nation state idea and into a new type of civilization premised on one world government controlled by a technocratic managerial class who would then shape the evolutionary development of the species to something that has never existed before. He's a transhumanist. And he describes in his third wave thesis that the first wave of humanity, which he divides into three sort of categories. The first wave was the agricultural, feudal, pre-national. And then he describes the second wave was the industrial, the democratic, the national, which is now coming to an end. And the third wave, which he's the prophet of, is the information-based, techno-feudal, post-nation state organization of society, transhumanist, human-machine integration is his view of where the elites that he works for have to push society. The other thing I would just say too, it was as Zhao Ziyang was premier in 1980 that they oversaw and I think it was Kissinger who really put a lot of pressure on China to say, okay, if we're going to allow you to have these industries and manufacturing, you have to start imposing the Club of Rome models to a one-child policy. And so the actual origins of China's one-child policy comes from the Club of Rome. It's not a Chinese policy. And that's a chapter in my book. This guy was a big implementer of this. So, okay, let's get now he's the Secretary General of China when Tiananmen Square is happening. He's the guy who is imprisoned for his role in overseeing what was going to be a takeover of of China at that time. So WikiLeaks 2011 releases cables that for the first time seen by public eyes that the U.S. Embassy in Beijing basically admitted on the site while it was happening that there was no actual murders that happened in the square where students were protesting 22 years earlier. There's not just that. You also have within the WikiLeaks cables, Latin American, I think it's a Guatemalan ambassador and his wife who went through the square all night long and registered that they didn't see any actual violence in the square itself. And the students were there, by the way, because you had Hu Yaobang, who was a chair and a general secretary of the CCP, who had died in April 15th, 1989. And he was very beloved. He was a reformer, very beloved by the people. And a lot of people showed up to pay respects to Hu Yaobang. There was also inflation, like 26% inflation was going on because of the reforms by Milton Friedman, the privatization and opening up of China in the 80s was done very sloppily. And it was very, very much monetized. And so people couldn't afford groceries. Wages were not increasing. And so because of that problem, people started protesting. And they started also saying, hey, we need to got to lower the prices. So you have these factors going on. Now, what's behind that? What's WikiLeaks talking about? Well, the actual square where the students were, and that's in the middle of this Beijing. Now, like half a mile away is where rioters did happen. And a few days before June 4th, you had striking laborers who were being provided weapons, Molotov cocktails by the CIA. We're going to say a word about that soon. That got violent. And it seems as though between 250 to 300 people did die in that one. The Vancouver Sun of September 17th, 1992 registered that the Central Intelligence Agency had sources among the Tiananmen Square protesters, and for months before the protests, the CIA had been helping student activists to form anti-government movements. Again, some of the people who played a key role here were Gene Sharp, James Lilly on the bottom left, the ambassador to the United States to Beijing, who was a former high-up official within the CIA. Gene Sharp was also there during at least 9 days of the Tiananmen Square protests. And this is the guru of color revolutions. All his formulas, his playbill has been used in Georgia, in Ukraine. Everywhere there's been a color revolution, it's been the Gene Sharp playbill that's been utilized and followed. And that's a documentary made on his techniques. It's a geek documentary.
I need to write his name down. His name is you said Sharpton?
Gene Sharp.
Gene Sharp. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Gene Sharp.
I was focused on Lilly. So Lilly, where have I heard that name before? James Lilly.
James Lilly is he's a big player here. Let me just pull up his. I
don't mean to send down a rabbit hole, down a rabbit trail or anything. I'm just interested that, like, where I'm just trying to think of what dig was it that I was on that where his name came up. It probably countless ones if he's CIA.
Yeah, I mean, he was a CIA operative. He was made ambassador under Bush Sr. to China. Very, very closely affiliated. I'm just on one of his bio pages right now. Yeah, it's too messy. But yeah, he's kind of everywhere. He was born in China too, so he's like an Orientalist from
interesting.
A family, and a lot of these families, not all, who are like part of the missionary circles in the 1920s and 30s in China. A lot of them, not all. There's some really good missionaries who love Jesus and like just really want to do good, but many of them are British and American Jesuit front organizations that are used for intelligence operations in foreign countries, whether India or China or you name it. That's unfortunately been part of the uglier side of the missionary legacy, has been used as fronts for imperial agencies wanting to infiltrate foreign governments that they want to subdue. That's an unfortunate part of life. His family sort of reeks of that a little bit, but I don't know. I didn't do the deep dive. That's two leading figures on the ground, John Pomfret and Alain Pessin. One is a Voice of America journalist. The other one is a CIA. Both of them are affiliated with the CIA. I forget the other one. But anyway, these are two characters who are playing key roles in trying to organize the provocateurs on the scene. One of the key provocateurs who escapes to the United States on June 4th or June 5th. She's brought out through Operation Yellowbird, is Chai Ling. And she's one of the leading student protesters, one of the more, her effort is to, or mandate is to radicalize the students, to try to get the students to get violent. Because the only way Zhao Ziyang can get power is if the students get really violent and force a government crackdown that results in death. If they can get that, the idea is that then Zhao Ziyang can come out as the hero of the people in defense of the students and will win like sort of a mass broad support, which will justify his overthrow of the Chinese government and install him as the official sort of Trotsky, Gorbachev type of character. Now, Chai Ling gives an interview on May 28th, 1989 to Philip Cunningham. I think he's with the LA Times, about her role overseeing what needs to happen in the this reform, this overthrow. And she describes saying, the students keep asking, what should we do next? What can we accomplish? I feel so sad because how can I tell them that what we are actually hoping for is bloodshed? For the moment when the government has no choice but to brazenly butcher the people, that is the students. Only when the square is awash with blood will the people of China open their eyes. Only then will they really be united. But how can I explain this to my fellow students? I can't say all this to my fellow students. I can't tell them straight out that we must use our blood and our lives to call on the people to rise up. Of course, the students will be willing, but they are still such young children. And what is truly sad is that some students and famous, well-connected people are working hard to help the government to prevent it from taking such measures. For the sake of their selfish interests and their private dealings, they are trying to cause our movement to collapse and to get us out of the square before the government becomes so desperate that it takes action. Now, this is a joke, right? Because this girl is she's so cold that she's literally calling for her desire for the students to die en masse, to provoke the government to kill them. She wants that. And at the same time, is she willing to walk the walk? No, not at all. Like the first chance she gets, she bails and goes, she leaves China and goes to Hong Kong, where the CIA and the triads are there to help her leave to go to New York, where she like lives out her days and gets a, posh scholarship and all sorts of opportunities. So, all right, fun girl, this one. So what's really going on? What are we looking at on the ground? So in Tiananmen Square itself with the students, the Chinese soldiers themselves were not allowed to carry weapons. In many cases, not even batons. So you had unarmed PLA soldiers. They're being fed by the students. You have competitions where they're singing songs to try to see who's better singers, like during the 24-hour stretch, especially where the high-level showdown, so-called, is happening. As I mentioned, you have the U.S. embassy cables. You have journalists on the ground. You got it's the Chilean ambassador and his wife are there the whole night. You've got many people who were there all night long till dawn, till the sun rose, describing how in Tiananmen Square there wasn't death, there wasn't murder. The people, they did get up and they did disperse. There was death and murder, though, in Beijing on those days, especially June 4th. Where did it happen? Well, this is, like I said, half a mile away, where you had labor striking. In the background, you see all of the buses that have been lit on fire. There's tanks that have been lit on fire, that have been bombed. In the background, these are not students. These are not students that were getting really violent. Here's a bunch of non-students who are lighting one of the tanks on fire. What we have here is a picture of some of the PLA buses that were housing soldiers that were lit on fire. That's a dead soldier that was burnt to death and choked. Yeah.
Oh shit! I didn't even pick up on that when we were looking at the picture. That's what that is.
Yeah, this is the next day. This is June 5th now. These are a bunch of tanks that were lit on fire. Again, this is not Tiananmen Square. This is not Tiananmen Square. Those tanks that we saw at the beginning were going to this other area where you had CIA provocateurs that had been sent to infiltrate striking laborers who got very violent. And here's another picture of a different PLA soldier who was lit on fire. I'm sorry for people watching. These are very graphic images, but it's important. More pictures of two different PLA soldiers as well, who were all strangled the same way and lit on fire alive. Another one on the left who was lit on fire left on a doorstep, and on the right hung from a crosswalk and also lit on fire. From what it seems in my analysis, there's been something to the effect of about 150 to 200 soldiers. Again, they weren't even armed, who were lit on fire and murdered. It was gory. It was bad. And about 250 to 300, as I said, overall casualties on that day. Operation Yellowbird this is from the South China Morning Post. There's many coverages. People can Google Operation Yellowbird if they want. It's very useful to look at this. This is how Tiananmen activists fled to freedom through Hong Kong. Basically, it goes through, this is from the article, describing how Operation Yellowbird was a British Hong Kong-based operation to help Chinese dissidents who participated in the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 to escape arrest by the Chinese government by facilitating their departure overseas via Hong Kong. Western intelligence agencies such as Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, aka MI6, and the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, were involved in this operation. Other contributors included politicians, celebrities, business people, and triad members from Hong Kong, forming the unlikely alliance which sustained the operation for most of its duration. So again, Hong Kong was still part of the British Empire in those days. It's Hong Kong money to this very day is minted by the HSBC, the Hong Shang Bank of Commerce, a London-based speculative opium bank. Also Standard and Poor's is another, Standard and Charter is another British bank that mints the other, I think 1/3 of the Chinese or the Hong Kong dollars. It's still known as the CIA of the Pacific for a reason, even though some of it was taken down after 2019. But this is how a lot of these individuals got out. And just quickly here, one of the key figures who that's Jimmy Lai on the right, who ran Apple Daily, major billionaire in Hong Kong, who was meeting with Nancy Pelosi. He's been a stooge for U.S. intelligence since the 80s. He was a big funder of the original Tiananmen Square in Hong Kong, from Hong Kong, and he was also the primary bankroller and propagandist for the second Hong Kong Tiananmen Square efforts that were made and failed in 2019. I think he's in jail now. On the left is Steve Bannon with Miles Guo. And Miles Guo also was a participant. He's a provocateur in the Tiananmen Square massacre, or not Tiananmen Square, in the uprising that I just went through. And he went to jail for about 2 years. When he got out of jail in China, he was immediately protected and rose through the ranks, became a real estate developer, a speculative investor. He ended up working with a JP Morgan outfit in China. It's called like Morgan Investment Beijing. In the 90s, he was being protected by, remember when you and I did that show on who is Xi Jinping, what makes Xi Jinping tick? You had what was known as the Shanghai clique. He was a part of and groomed by this Shanghai clique around Jiang Zemin. So even though Zhao Ziyang, who, by the way, Zhao Ziyang, who was the Gorbachev of China, he was given house arrest, and he died 16 years later in his house. He was never allowed to leave. Shen Yitzi, his lieutenant, co-ran a think tank called the Fund for the Reform and Opening Up of China offices that Soros funded, that was run by Zhao Ziyang's second in command. He escaped and was given sanctuary in New York after this. But again, Miles Guo was one of those who went to jail for their role as provocateurs. When he got out, he was being groomed by this network that took over from Zhao Ziyang, but they didn't fully abandon the Zhao Ziyang policy. They just had a slightly more subtle way of going about keeping China locked into the fourth industrial revolution that Kissinger and Alvin Toffler and Friedman were all advancing. And so he did this. He had the support of a lot of key figures who ran the Chinese Central Intelligence Agency, the Chinese Security Intelligence Services, who went to jail as well. And before he could go to jail for bribery and a variety of things in 2014, as part of Xi Jinping's anti-corruption program, he escaped and got sanctuary in the USA, where he had letters from Tony Blair, his friend, who gave him direct letters so that he could get the best New York condominium, where he ended up buying for like $14 million and started working with Steve Bannon, funding and bankrolling Steve Bannon's operations. A lot of them, as well as a lot of Falun Gong operators who ran a new agency called Epoch Times. And this is just a recent 2022 broadcast with Miles Guo and Connie Morgan, who is the great-granddaughter of J.P. Morgan, where they're describing the great heroic efforts of J.P. Morgan in American history, where Miles Guo is saying, Mrs. Morgan has made it very clear there was no stakeholders from the Morgan family in the Federal Reserve, nor did they get involved with the deep state. So this is rumor. Morgan family is real patriots for America. So I said that maybe in a bit of a racist accent, but but yeah, I mean, this guy is like completely in bed with the Morgan deep state complex that is behind the Federal Reserve's creation in 1913, and that was behind the Smedley Butler coup d'etat, that was a financier of eugenics, race science, and global fascist regimes in the 20s and the 30s. And this is the same JP Morgan apparatus that John F. Kennedy went to battle with when he fought United Steel, the JP Morgan United Steel operation, where JFK had his own patriots that he was empowering to control the interests of U.S. Steel, especially insofar as it went not only to develop infrastructure in America, the dam building, all of the mega infrastructure projects that JFK was overseeing, which United Steel was in opposition to. They were artificially jacking up the prices under JP Morgan's command, but also the idea of going to, like I'm talking about the Kaiser Steel, where JFK was helping to broker deals with Kwame Nkrumah to build U.S.-led funded dams, hydroelectric dams in Africa under Kaiser Steel's operations, which JP Morgan was in total opposition to, because he wanted to see Africa the way Kissinger did, as a resource extractor and not as some place that would industrialize and develop. So this is like what Miles Guo has been, and I believe continues to be, as a representative of the actual deep state, both of China and the US. And Tiananmen Square, like I said, it was a failed color revolution. It was one of the few places during that time where the color revolutionary formula failed to succeed. It had just succeeded in 1986 to overthrow Ferdinand Marcos in Philippines. Mark Malloch Brown and Soros collaborated together in 86 in the Philippines to do that operation and to bring in a Western-controlled asset, Cory Aquino, who privatized the Philippines and undid the national policy of Ferdinand Marcos. Unfortunately, Ferdinand Marcos's son, Marcos Jr., is carrying out the puppet legacy of Aquino and not his father. But that's an unfortunate irony. But China, like I said, unlike Russia, was the only place that I could see successfully fought this thing off and kept a national control over their world. And they've never been forgiven. So now we've got a couple of generations later, the myth of what Tiananmen Square was has just amplified to such heights. It boggles the mind of the most creative writer. But yet they just keep on coming up with more numbers, more testimonials from people who were part of the regime change operation and who have been given sanctuary in the United States or Canada or Australia. And they're provided a nice protection and funding and jobs and comfort. And all they have to do is give a testimonial, and they're good. And the myth just grows and grows. So that's my story on Tiananmen Square on the anniversary today.
No, that was great. Thanks for getting into all that. New Case in the chat asks an interesting question. Aquino, and I kind of had the same thought when I heard the name, but is he related to Michael Aquino?
No. Coriato Aquino, maybe, but I don't think so.
I didn't. I figured if you knew that connection, you would have brought it up because that would be a little too in your face.
I think Coriato Aquino was pretty pure blood Philippine, but then again, Michael Aquino was a Satanist operating in Vietnam. Maybe he was doing black operations in the Philippines too during that time, perhaps, but I wouldn't guess it. I would say probably not a direct connection.
Yeah, probably just a coincidence.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, awesome. Yeah, man. Well, appreciate that. Everyone, again, hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed this show, and please share it around. Yeah, and it looks like we covered the boosts and no rants, so I think we're good.
Okay, one thing I'd say, if people want, I have a dossier. I'll put this Tiananmen Square China dossier in the description box under the Rumble video and wherever else it goes. So check out the dossier that I'll include. Also have the Breaking Free of Anti-China PSYOPs special report that I published with my wife of volumes 1 and 2. If people really want to own this information, I'd suggest dive into that very. It might be info heavy, but really important strategically to not get duped and played by people who are running our toying with our emotional heartstrings right now to get us to acquiesce to very, very disastrous policies that are going to get a lot of people killed. So I'd highly encourage people to jump into those things in the description box or in the comment section under this video.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, that's great. Thanks again, everybody. We will see you next week. I will be on my show Friday at 2. Geopolitics. Do you have anything coming up, Matt?
Oh yeah, well, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna be starting a new project on Sunday. It's gonna be a stream with Pluralia. So it's a forum that hosts these international Verona summits, and we've agreed to combine forces, and we're gonna host a bi-monthly live stream that people can tune into, ask questions to various experts on the topic of avoiding World War III and trying to found the basis for peaceful relations between cultures. So this week we'll have Alex Craner on, a former lieutenant colonel from the U.S., Karen, I can't pronounce her last name, very big, long Polish name. I'm so sorry, Karen. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she'll be coming on as well.
Yeah. I've seen her on Judge Napolitano's show. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that'll be on Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. If people want to tune in, they can go to
throw the link in the comments. And
that's what we'll do. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Dude, and when I heard you say Verona, I was gonna say, is this related to the stuff that Alex Craner was telling us about Verona? And then you said Craner's coming on. So okay. Yeah, I want more. I want more info on that offline. All right, man. Well, everyone, cool. hit the thumbs up, and we will see you next week.
All right, toodles.
All right, see y'all.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.